Welcome, movie fans. Thanks so much for joining us for episode 82 of Reading Between the Reels. If you're a new listener, we're so glad you found us. If you've been enjoying the show, please tell someone about us, post on X or Facebook, write a review on your favorite podcast catcher, or just recommend the show to a friend. I'm Craig Dickinson, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Justin Eldon. Corey Hatchman's out tonight, but should be back next time. How's it going, Justin?
So good.
Excellent. And today on the show, we're thrilled to be joined by Thomas Riddle, educator and founder of Imagineering Education and co-founder of Star Wars in the Classroom and Adventures in Learning with Indiana Jones. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
I appreciate it, Craig. Justin, it's a real honor to be with you guys.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit off mic that you've actually been on the show. Our listeners will probably be familiar with you from our RBR in class segments when you talk to my students over Zoom. And this is the first time we had it on the show proper and way overdue. But we're so glad you're here.
I appreciate it. And I always have a blast talking with your kids. They're always well prepared, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So tonight we are talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981. And I thought Thomas would be the perfect guest for this. And so, Thomas, I'm going to ask you to start us off with what are your overall thoughts on Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Man, it's definitely one of my top 10 movies, probably one of my top 7. It's a fantastic film, and I saw it like Star Wars when I was 8 years old when Star Wars came out. So let's see, I was 12 when Raiders came out. So I saw it at this great time of when I was just all into adventure stories and swashbuckling heroes, and Raiders kind of fit that bill for everything. It was great to see a classic hero that in that style of the old RKO serials being reintroduced to a new generation. I'd watched some of the old Flash Gordon serials when I was a kid, when my dad introduced those to me, and I was a little familiar with the genre, but absolutely loved it. And it's I mean, what can you say? We'll spend a lot of time tonight talking about it, but it's a fantastic film, and hopefully all your listeners have seen it.
Nice. Justin, what about you? What are your thoughts on Raiders?
I just don't think there's going to be any negativity here tonight. I'm going to agree with Thomas, like probably top 10. I don't know if I've actually put that together in a while, but I would guess top 10 movies of all time. Like, it's about as close to a perfect film as you can get, and it completely withstands the test of time. Like, even though it's 40 some odd years old at this point, like it holds up. The effects for the most part hold up. Even that end part with the face melting, maybe not so much, but it's great nonetheless. But just overall, just a wonderful film, and the amount of nostalgia I have attached to this movie. My parents, growing up, were super strict on what movies we could watch, and for whatever reason, this flew under their radar. It was way too violent for what they should have allowed, but they let us watch it, and it was on repeat all the time. And as a kid, I borrowed and then never returned the box set from a friend of mine that had all 3 of the Indiana Jones movies, and to this day, I still claim that never happened. So Corey, if you're listening, it didn't happen. I lied. That's a lie. Anyway,
I'm just curious. Do you still have it?
I don't think so. I mean, I never had it. I never
had it.
I would never steal that.
I tried, Corey. I tried.
No, I watched it all the time, and it was fantastic. Indiana Jones is in my brain the quintessential action hero. He fits all the bills, and in large part, I think somewhere deep in my psyche, he might be a reason why I became a history teacher. I wanted to be Indiana Jones so badly, and it's actually really nothing like that at all. But yeah, fantastic film.
Yeah, I would echo much of what you guys have already said. It's in my probably top 5 favorite films of all time. As you said, Justin, it's nearly as perfect a film as you could get. This time I noticed just how incredibly well paced it is. It's under 2 hours, which is remarkable how much happens in it. And it just feels like at the end, especially, just gets there faster every time, but not in a bad way. It's oh my gosh, we're here already. And because it never lets you go. I just love how efficient this movie is, how lean it is. And as you know, for the podcast, trying to pull out specific cinematic aspects, there's too much to get all of it. It's so well done that it was like, all right, I just have to just get whatever I can get and just let the rest go and just, you know, enjoy it as much as I can, because there's so much great from this film. The one thing I did want to bring up that's a little bit new is that I'd heard of the movie 1941 over the years, but had never seen it until recently. And I only did that because I was looking through, as I was researching, I noticed that several of the studios actually had passed on this movie before Paramount grabbed it, because of 1941. And it's amazing now we look at, you know, Spielberg has been kind of venerated as this, one of the greatest, if not the greatest director of all time. But there was a moment where it was, maybe he's, you know, a 2-hit wonder, and we don't know, if we don't necessarily trust that he's going to be able to put another thing together. And then, you know, it's in that context that Raiders is released. And even from that becomes this, yes, this is one of the greatest movies of all time. And so I think it's important also to note that context. And it had a lot kind of going against it from the beginning, but it definitely rose above all that.
Yeah, if you're going to have a rolling Ferris wheel, you got to have a rolling boulder, right? So, I mean, there's got to be something that's going to. 1941 still had its influence there, but yeah, I saw that when I was a kid, and it was. I haven't seen it since. Not good. Not
right,
good.
No, it's not. That's not. I mean, it's got Spielberg. Obviously, it's got John Williams. It's got, you know, John Candy's in it, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd. There's a lot of pieces in it, and you're like, this should work. And Christopher Lee's in it. It just doesn't work. But
it has all the ingredients. It's just
yeah, and
kind of like Big Trouble in Little China, Craig.
Oh, and except for that's a great film, but it's like every way that 1941 didn't, and that's a period piece too, as is, you know, Raiders. So it's kind of interesting. Everything that didn't work for 1941 worked for Raiders. So let's go ahead though. Let's jump into some of the things that do work. Cinematography things, composition, color, cam work. I'm just going to throw it out there. You guys just whatever you notice that you want to bring up, any of those things, and then I'll just jump in.
I think kind of like you said, Craig, like it was like the pacing in this movie was incredibly well done. Like I never felt like there was a lull from the very start where you're being introduced to all the characters. Like they do such a fantastic job introducing these characters, and a lot of that is done through the composition and the camera work. Just that opening scene with Indy there in the jungle, you get a couple of close-ups like on his face. You get a couple of like wide shots and like camera pullbacks to kind of show the scenery of the jungle, and a couple of I'm losing the word here. Tracking shots, like where the camera is moving, just like through the jungle effortlessly. And I had such a hard time. Like I had to go back. I made it about halfway through this movie, like kind of watching it with this podcast in mind. And then I realized I wasn't watching it with like this podcast in mind. I was just watching it for enjoyment. And then I was like, oh no, I gotta go back and like actually try and dissect this. And it's such a hard movie to dissect because I've seen it so many times as just like pure enjoyment that my brain almost didn't want to dissect it and realize that there's a camera there filming all of this. And it almost like took me out of the fun because it's done so well. Like I didn't want to pull it apart. It kind of made me sad to do so. But everything just seems so seamless. Everything just like flows together so well. At no point was there anything like so visually overwhelming that like it was distracting in a way that it shouldn't have been. For example, like anytime the Ark was on the screen, like obviously that was the center of attention visually. But I didn't feel like there was anything in there unnecessarily, like I said, drawing your attention away. Like whatever was the focus, the filmmakers did a fantastic job of like making sure the audience was looking at that. Whether it was, Harrison Ford or I forget who plays Belloc. What is his name?
Paul Freeman. Right?
Paul Freeman,
yeah, Paul Freeman. Like, yeah, whether it's Harrison Ford or Paul Freeman, like they were just so charismatic on the screen, and like the filmmakers knew that, and just the camera work in general knew that as well. Like, you got a lot of close-up shots of those two guys because they kind of stole the scene there.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that the use of the close-up is fantastic throughout the film. The first time you see Indy's face when Harrison turns around, it's a great reveal. Just right up close on his face, and I'm thinking even when Sapito is looking, he's about to swap the idol, and there's this close-up on Molina's face. Again, I think the camera angles used here, we are trying to dissect a master, right? But but it's used to great effect when you're trying to build that tension, and that's often seen through those close-up shots. But then at the same time, you have these sweeping panoramic views of, like, when Indy steals the horse and takes off through the camp, and there's this large sweeping pan shot just to give you great scope of the desert and the size of that camp and the dig site itself. So there's that back and forth between those wide sweeping shots and the use of the close up that's really flawless. I'm with you, Justin. It's kind of hard to pick this film apart because there's just so much goodness to it.
Yeah, that is definitely our task for tonight, and it's a little difficult because you just want to sit back and watch. But it's really it's visually arresting. It's really interesting, and some certain things that I pulled out this time. I want to echo too, Justin, what you said. Some of the composition is just absolutely gorgeous. The way, like, the idol is framed in the middle the first time he walks in that room, and the same thing with the Ark. It's just perfectly balanced on both sides. But this time I wanted to talk about Indy's shadow when he comes back into Marion's life. Like, you see that before you see the reveal of Harrison Ford there, and it's like he's looming so large over her past. Like, that's the only way I think you can read that. And then there's also a similar thing. I love the conversation in the bar between Belloc and Indy, where he brings him in, and it's a really interesting shot because you have Indy on the left is just enormous. He's in the foreground and Belloc's in the background, really, really small, and Indy's just staring off to the whole conversation, not even looking at him. It just lingers there for such a long time until the very end of the conversation. And just like the choices are obviously they're intentional, but they're kind of unique in a lot of these ways. And so you like, what are we trying to get from this? And it's like, I mean, I look at this and obviously Ford's the protagonist, right? And Belloc is this guy who they're trying to show them. He's trying to basically, in that whole conversation, is trying to say, we're equals. We're, two sides of the same coin. But the camera is showing us that that's very much not the case. And I just love those little quirks of things like that.
Yeah, I think what you pointed out about the shadow is a fantastic point, because I always thought the same thing, Craig. It's kind of like the shadow of the past, where he's walking. It's this looming specter of Indy in Marion's life. So I really like how that is, and it's huge. It's large on the wall, so it's really overpowering her. But yeah, I think I've never thought about that shot with Belloc, where Indy's framed closer more in the foreground, and it definitely sends the message of who is the larger figure, who's the protagonist.
Yeah, in both of those sequences too, I love how they kind of sprinkle this throughout. Like, you get the sense that these characters have a past with one another, and there's a lot of history between them, both professional and not so professional, that it touches on, and it kind of like it wants, like, you want to know more about, okay, what has happened before we met these characters, but it's not so distracting from the here and now, what's going on in the film. I like that they're able to sprinkle that there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Kasdan's a master at that, where you're like, there's a hinted past, and you want to know more, but you don't have to necessarily to make the story work. Anything else in cinematography that we need to talk about before we move down to sound?
Yeah, one thing I really like is the scene where they're looking at the headpiece with the old Egyptian man, with the imam. And in the background, that was beautifully framed as well. You've got Indy and Salah and the imam, but in the background, you start noticing the clouds rolling in. And there's this foreshadowing of the looming danger that's to come. And of course, they're also, they're discussing the power of God. They're discussing uncovering this sacred relic. And so it's really, I love it because you see the same kind of storm clouds roll in when they're taking the lid off of the Well of the Souls and the storm starting to come. So it's a really, I love that clip with the imam.
Nice. There's normally not a perfect place to put this, but the editing in this film too is just genius, and it's one of many Oscars this film won. I think won 5 Oscars, and we'll get to it. Won an Oscar for editing, and then as we move into sound, it won. We're scrolling down here real fast. Oscars for best sound and best sound editing for this film. So as we talk about that, what kind of effects or music stood out to you during this view?
Well, it definitely introduced us to the Indy punch.
Yes.
I mean, that's become an iconic sound with Indy's punching someone. But the sound editing is fantastic. The whip, I mean, everything's just so crisp. But to me, the big takeaway from that one, besides the crack of the whip, is the sound of him punching people.
Yeah.
Okay. It's overly exaggerated. Is that what that? I don't know if I've ever picked up on that. Maybe I've seen it too many times.
It's a definite sound that when it's a unique sound that you hear throughout all the Indiana Jones movies. It's the sound of his punch. So I mean, you can hear it.
Is it only him punching, or is it anyone punching?
I'm trying to remember if it's is exaggerated when you when he's getting hit, because he takes his share of shots for sure.
I'm thinking of that scene underneath, like with
the mechanic.
Yeah. I'm thinking of all those noises. Those are some punches.
But I remember in Dial of Destiny when Andy walks up, he's trying to blend in. He's dressed as a German soldier, and he comes up to the window, and he punches the driver out for the car so he can get in and drive the officers. And when he does so, he throws that punch. I remember sitting in the theater thinking, there it is. This is the last time we're going to hear, hear some of these things related specifically to Indy, or at least what I grew up thinking about. But yeah, I remember that is that same sound effect that you always have. And of course, the Wilhelm scream, So you've got the
always.
Yep.
I remember
along the same lines
before
Before
I knew what that was as a kid, and like watching that and hearing that scream, I was like, "What? Why is there the same scream in all these movies? What's going on?" And then as an adult, I was like, "Oh, it's like a thing. Okay, got it."
Easter egg. I was going to say along the lines of the punch being super loud, the gun too.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Winchester rifle to stand in for the pistol, which is, I mean, it's way too loud, but it's awesome. And yes, I think that's just his gun that's so loud.
Maybe it's highly customized. Like Indy has customized it to
certainly
extra powerful.
Some other fun things with this one too. The arc lid opening is the back of a toilet being lifted off. That's fun. God bless Ben Burt, man. The things he comes up with.
It's crazy.
I also found that the snake slithering in like the Well of the Souls is him running his hands through cheese casserole. So, I mean, it's great. Because I can't, even though I know that, I'm watching that and it's still, no, those are snakes. That's what snakes sound like.
Right.
So if I was ever in that situation, I'd be sorely disappointed they don't sound like that.
Why does the
God
floor
forbid.
move?
Oh, we'll get there. The music is John Williams, which is amazing. There's so many leitmotifs in this one. The Raiders March is instantly iconic, I think. And it's super versatile too. We hear it in different keys and in different tempos. And I just love that so much. What about you, Thomas? What do you like for the music?
I love the fact that Williams had two themes, and
Yes.
and he couldn't choose between. He played them both for Spielberg, and Spielberg said, "Why can't you use them both?" And that's why we have the dun 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 dun, and then you have dun 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 dun, dun, which is the separate theme that Williams had composed and put them both to get both together. And there, I mean, it would sound weird otherwise, But Williams once again he was on quite a roll through this time period in his filmmaking, and Raiders just was another knockout of the park. Like you said, the leitmotifs are fantastic. Marion's theme to this day is one of my favorite compositions of his. It's what again, you were trying to. There's so much. I mean, there's everything about that score. I listen to it all the time, and along with his others. But for Raiders particularly, it's the first time we heard that, and it's so catchy. It's one of those things that you can leave the theater with it in your head, and that's the sound of the sign of a good score.
Yeah, and I remember David Collins. I'm pretty sure it was on the soundtrack show when he covered. He had some great stuff about Raiders, and the fact that Marion's theme one is structurally very similar to Leia's theme, which makes a lot of sense. They have a lot in common, sure, but it's interesting that we think of if it's called Marion's theme, we think of every time she's on screen that would be kind of her theme music, but really what it is it's more Indy's perception of Marion's theme. It's really what he's thinking of her is when we hear that. Which after I heard him describe it that way, I was like, yeah, I watch the movie that way every time now. I can't not hear that.
Right.
It's got to be through his eyes that happens.
Yeah, because he's seen that. That's a great point, and I'd never heard David talk about that. Or that's terrific, because I was just reading something this afternoon where Kieran Allen was talking about that. There were times when Spielberg and the writers were wanting to play Marion as more of a damsel in distress in some scenes, and she said this is not who she is, and said that was not her character. And so, thinking of what you just said about the theme, it's a very romantic theme. It's seen through Indy's. I don't think she would see herself that way.
Agreed.
at all. But it really gives you insight into what he's thinking really about her, despite the fact he tries to hide it behind that gruff exterior that he's still head over heels for.
Yeah, and I always think of that in terms of the scene where he's drinking after he thinks that she's died. And it's that really kind of slow, melancholy version of her theme. And it's like she's not even on screen. It's clearly him thinking about that. That seemed to be the most obvious statement of that. That was like, yes, this is his ideas of that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one of my favorite tracks from that soundtrack is the Desert Chase. I mean, it's just become iconic. That entire long piece of the chasing the convoy, and it's such a great use of Indy's theme, or the Raiders theme through that, but also it just fits the scene perfectly, fits the action perfectly. Whenever I listen to that piece of music, I can see every scene or every frame in my head, because it just pairs with the action so well.
And speaking of that, this time I had to find out what it was. I had to research the basket game is the name of the song. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's that kind of frenzied and almost comical. It's almost Mickey Mousing through certain things, which is great because it's like you would think with different music, you'd think she's actually really in danger. But it's kind of played very light. This movie's pretty heavy in a lot of moments, but it's also got great moments of levity like that. And then you also, of course, you have like when she hits the guy with the frying pan, like that's a very exaggerated kind of cartoon-esque sound effect. But
I was going to say a sound effect too, along with that.
So good.
And then even when she's, you hear her, Indy, she's,
Yeah.
it's just everything's exaggerated until you come to the Cairo Swordsman.
Yep. And then you contrast that with like the Ark theme, which we haven't talked about either, which is just so haunting. Like I don't even want to talk about it. It's so good. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just wonderful. Something else that, again, I got to give credit where credit's due. David Collins pointed out the pizzicato. It's called pizzicato. It's little plucking of the strings when the tarantulas are on the two guys, Sapito and Indy in that first Peruvian temple. It's so creepy and it works so beautifully. I love that. What a great use of music instead of sound effect for that. Just interesting. It stands in for that. And then one last thing I had for that was that you have this, what I think is just a great transition from the main title. The first time we get to hear the main title fully stated, and then he's traveling back, and then it ends with bells as we see the school, which is just instinctively makes us think it's class is about to start. And just wow, just genius. So good.
He's a master storyteller with music for sure. I mean, Spielberg and Lucas's films wouldn't be what they are without John Williams. I mean, there's some terrific composers out there who were active at the time, of course, but none of them, I can't imagine those stories without Williams being accompanied by Williams music.
Yeah, and growing up in the 80s, like how spoiled, I mean, to have that and Star Wars and Superman and E.T.
Yeah, I've often said that he wrote the soundtrack to my childhood.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's everything I listened to. The albums I wanted as a kid. I wasn't getting very many rock albums or anything, pop culture or pop music albums or anything. I was getting soundtracks. I was getting scores, mainly Williams.
So speaking of music that's not John Williams, what did you think? This is kind of just a random question, Thomas, but the Sala singing from the HMS Pinafore, what did you think of those songs? Did that make sense? Did that work for you? Did that feel odd? Because you were much older than I was. No, sorry about that. That sounded really mean. You were a little older than I was. As an almost teenager, first time you heard that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have picked up on what that was from. Although when he starts talking about a British tar, and then it wasn't. I guess on subsequent viewings through my teenage years, once I really started studying history more and understanding the role of British colonialism in the Middle East, and it made more sense to me that he's singing this song, which is related though to British imperialism. But it was at the time. No, I had no clue. I just thought it was a cool little shanty. That was all.
No, yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that does give some context because that just always struck me as kind of odd. But giving that historical context, I'm on board with that now. That makes sense. I also wanted to point out another, I guess, kind of vocal sound is like the Ark spirits and the way they came up with those. I read it was sea lions and dolphins filtered through a vocoder. And
yes,
I kind of hear that.
Right, I'd heard that before, and I still going back. I can't hear it, even though I've read that before. I still just can't. I can't get that. But yeah, the sound. Ben Burtt just outdid himself on this film. He does with everything, but for this one, I think particularly, there's so many iconic sounds that came out of this, and of course, accompanied with John Williams music. It was just it's wonderful for the ears.
Nice. So we're going to go ahead and move down to performance. And I would say that really there's moments where we could have veered into melodrama, but I think it all stayed pretty steady, even in some fantastical things. And so dialogue, this amazing dialogue in this. And so usually in this section, Thomas will ask for, like, do you have one or two favorite phrases or conversations or examples of dialogue from this film?
Um,
I know, I'll put you on the spot a little bit.
no. Actually, one of my favorite lines from that film is delivered the way Karen Allen delivers the line when Indy first comes to the Raven. And Indiana Jones, I always knew that someday you'd come walking back through my door. And when I don't know why that always stuck with me, but I thought that was even as a kid, I wanted to know, well, what's this whole story all about? You know, what's going on here? But I've just always liked that. I think the whole scene, there's not much dialogue, there's some, but where does it hurt? I thought that was wonderfully played.
Yeah.
I love that. But I think two of my favorite words, just two words together from the entire film, that I've often used in different situations is top men. Top men.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, who do you have working on it? Top men.
Yes.
So I like those, but there's and then the other one is just I'm making it up as I go along.
Yep.
I mean, you can't. That really is kind of summarizes the character of Indiana Jones. I don't know. I'm making it up as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
So it's those are great for things that just come off the top of my head. But what about for you?
I started just kind of chronologically at the beginning in the temple. Satipo says, "Let us hurry. There's nothing to fear here." He says, "That's what scares me."
Yeah.
But I love that conversation. I mentioned it earlier, the conversation in the bar with Belloc, and it's long, and almost all of it is amazing. But just a couple examples from there. Belloc says at one point, "Where shall I find a new adversary so close to my own level?" And Indy says, "Try the local sewer." So good. But I think my favorite part is the end, though, when Belloc says, "Jones, do you realize what the Ark is? It's a transmitter. It's a radio for speaking to God, and it's within my reach." And Indy says, this is when he finally turns to him. "You want to talk to God? Let's go see him together. I've got nothing better to do."
Yep.
It's like that's the thing that finally gets him to interact. He's just been tuning him out. Oh, so good.
Yeah, it's great. And the other thing that I like there, the bit of dialogue is when he's talking about the watch. And if we just bury this in 1,000 years, it'll be priceless. But there's and also that whole scene is just great when he's talking about. And you mentioned this earlier, Craig, where there's he's telling Andy there's really not much difference between you and I.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's and those two actors play that so well together as well.
Yeah, I still think that what's become one of my favorite lines, and my kids will be disappointed if I don't bring it up, is when they open up the Well of the Souls.
Oh, yeah.
And Solace says, "Indy, why does the floor move?" It's like, "Give me your torch." And then we get the great snakes. Why does it have to be snakes? Which used to be the part that got me. But really what gets me now is Salah's reply. "Asps, very dangerous. You go first."
You go first.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There's just the right amount of humor throughout that entire thing, Yeah. Asps, very deadly. You go first.
Which I was struck this time when he leaves. Actually, after they get the Ark out of the box and they're pulling it up, that Indy lets Sala go first, which I thought was fascinating because this is torturous for him to be down there,
right?
But I think that also spoke volumes about who Indy is at that moment,
right?
So,
what is it Belloc says? Once again. What is it? What's he say? How's it go?
What was briefly yours?
It's now mine. Yep.
Nice. Oh, so good. Yep, I had that. I'm making this up as I go. That's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. What else did you have down?
Well, I just had, which again, the older I get, the more this is awesome. It's not the years, honey. It's the mileage.
Oh, how could I not forget that? I use that one all the time. Oh, God. Yeah, that one's great. That's I definitely can relate to that one for sure. At this stage of life.
Yeah. Well, we also like to talk about body language and facial expressions as part of performance. And you mentioned Satipo's face and his hand movements, which I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. Harrison speaks volumes with his eyes. He, as an actor, I think he does that incredibly well. And he does it throughout this film as well. I mean, again, going back to the first time we see him, he's got this steely-eyed glare on his face when he turns around, right? It's just this focused determination. And then even when you see him with Sala and Marion at Sala's house or up on the roof, the laughter, that subtle laughter. It's the first time you really kind of see him let his guard down. And even when he sees Marion, when he discovers Marion is still alive, he has such a range of expressions that I think as an actor, he does incredibly well. And it really brings depth to the character of Indiana Jones. But those are things that the look of confusion that that confused look that he'll often give. He does it as Han Solo too, like in Empire Strikes Back. Who, me? It's that right. You see that with Indy several times, and even the pratfall when he gets punched in the face by the mechanic.
Yes, and it falls backwards.
It falls backwards. I mean that look on his face again. It's those little subtle nuances that Ford plays so well that makes you. I think it makes the character so much more human, so much more identifiable. So he does, but I love the acting that he does with his eyes throughout. I mean, most of his films.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, I had a couple of those that I wrote down that were slightly different. Like when he has the love you eyelids, the look on his face, he's completely baffled at what's happening, and he stutters over his. It's just. I love that he's almost two characters in this film. The teacher Indy and archaeologist Indy are very different. There's different sides of his personality, different contexts and things like that. We all have, we all act differently in different circumstances or whatever.
Right.
Sure. But it's interesting that we do get to see these other sides of his personality where he's not in control. And then I also had the part where we see the top of the Well of Souls being opened. That he almost almost like a crazed look. His eyes are super wide. It's like he's reached this goal, and he almost looks crazy. It's interesting, right. Almost like he's possessed. I also had things about the truck chase. Man, I just wrote, this is still my favorite action sequence of all time. Yeah, it's flawless, and the only thing that I'm kind of sorry for is that with the advent of CGI is that at this point, when I show this to people who have not seen it, nothing is CGI, guys. You got to understand. Right. I would show this to my students in film class. I'm like, these are stuntmen doing this.
Yep. Exactly.
It's so good.
Yeah. And I love the inspiration for it too, is that that chase is from Zorro.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that one?
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's actually there was a lobby card that was at ILM, if I'm not mistaken. That's where it was. But there's an image. I can share it with you, Craig. It's pretty cool, but it's almost the same thing. Zorro is jumping up on a truck from about the same time period, off of his horse, and so that was the inspiration for Indy riding the horse into that chase.
That's so good.
Yeah. But again, to think that there was a real person dragged behind a truck, including Harrison, but dragged under the truck. There's when I was a kid and watched the making of, there were some things that I can't unsee now. That once you see, like you can see the groove underneath the between the wheels of the truck. Where
I noticed that this time too.
Yeah, where he's dragged back, but still, it's that scene is one of the best. I would agree with you. Yeah. By far, it's one of the best action sequences of film.
Something else I wanted to put that's not Harrison Ford.
Hey, I'm sorry.
No,
yeah,
go for it. Yeah.
And that chase. I just thought about that when the guy falls off the ladder during that chase, and Indy's in the cab of the truck with the German soldier, and the guy falls on the windshield. You know what I'm talking about? It has this look.
Yes, I do. Yeah, and
they're both kind of look shocked, and the German guy turns and smiles at Indy, and he throws him. I mean, it's just again one of those. Just the subtle nuances, the facial expressions that are great. But
yeah,
I digress.
Oh no, that's kind of what we do. The Marion's introduction with the drinking contest and the way that there's nothing in English there, so you all have to pick that up with body language and her facial expressions, where she's, it looks like I'm assuming she's acting more drunk than she is, because she gets right up really quickly at the end. What an amazing example of indirect characterization, where you get to know who she is so quickly.
Right.
And then it's also foreshadowing for the Belloc drinking scene later. Like, it does so many different things.
Right. I agree. And that you don't have the scene with Belloc in the tent without that introductory scene. I mean, it just doesn't play the same. I love that. And I didn't know until recently that the guy she's drinking against is I think it was a tourist. I mean, he wasn't
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't from Nepal. I think was it Australian or something like that. I can't remember. It was like in the where did I see that? Like in the script notes or something. I don't even know how I found that, but yeah, that's the first time. I always assumed he was just a local that she was drinking against. But again, it doesn't matter. Again, it sets up that says a lot about her character when you've got this big burly guy and she's drinking him under the table, and she's this petite little thing,
Mm-hmm.
So to me, again, it's like, tell me more of your story. How did you get to that point?
Yep.
So,
she's not the damsel in distress, like you mentioned.
Not at all.
We've alluded to a little bit the fact that this is an homage, and so obviously Jones's attire is very much based on past things, like Humphrey Bogart's in The Treasure of Sierra Madre, Charlton Heston in Secret of the Incas, a couple things. But he also had the tweed suit and the glasses. I mentioned it's kind of this other persona. I love that there's that dichotomy between those two things. And one of the I wanted to mention, just Belloc's, like, his priest outfit at the end. I remember there was an action figure of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Still have my Indiana Jones action figure, the spring-loaded hand. Did you collect those, Thomas?
That's funny. I actually just tweeted about that today. I still can't call it X. What do you call it? Exited about it. Yeah, whatever it is. That I have a friend who has one of the largest collections of science fiction toys and collectibles I've ever seen, a personal collection I've ever seen anywhere. I mean, he's been giving it to museums across the country. So, I mean, I've been helping him curate it to donate to multiple museums. And he came across the original line of Kenner Indy toys that he'd forgotten he had and boxed up. I mean, it looks like the warehouse when you go into his collection from the end of the movie.
Nice.
And so I was lamenting the fact that I never did collect those as a kid. I don't know why. I was at that age. I was still getting Star Wars stuff. I was kind of getting out of toys, though. I was, like I said, I was like right there at 12 or 13, but I was collecting Star Wars stuff now.
Yeah, exactly.
But I had the board game, the Raiders of the Lost Ark board game, and I don't even remember it. The only reason I know is because looking at pictures from Christmas of that year, there it was amongst my stuff I got for Christmas, and I still don't have recollection of that. But you were talking about Belloq's robes.
The fact that I think he thinks he's being authentic. Like that's kind of, he's like, I'm going to do this ceremony. I want to make sure I've checked all the boxes. And it's like, what he doesn't realize is that he's only adding to the sacrilege.
Right, exactly.
Going on. It's so arrogant of him. He speaks in Hebrew in the whole bit. And it's like, you didn't make it better, dude.
No.
You made it much, much worse.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where I wondered, wait a minute. How did you happen to have those robes on that island? You were supposed to do this ceremony for the Führer back in Berlin, but you sent ahead for them, I guess. Or maybe you just had it packed ready for something, in case you had to do it wherever. You knew what you were going to do. But yeah, I agree with you. That was incredibly arrogant, just made it so much worse. Not that it was going to be any better, but yeah, it was... that was an interesting scene. Yes.
Well, I think we've lost Justin. Hopefully he'll get back, but I'm sure he loved this movie, and he's very sorry that he's not on us with it right now. Hopefully he'll join a little bit later.
I hope so.
As we move down to setting and design, another Oscar, this time for Best Art Direction, which is now called Best Production Design, which, yeah, obviously. Locations... it was filmed in Tunisia. I love the fact that it's filmed in Tunisia. That's such a Lucasfilm thing.
Yep.
Some in Hawaii, like the beginnings in Hawaii. Right? Yeah, exactly. You've scattered it already.
And you've got Jawa Canyon right there. Where they're marching the Ark through is the same canyon where the Jawas.
Oh my gosh, why did I not remember that?
Yeah. So it's the same location where R2 gets ambushed by the Jawas.
Oh, that's a nice pull.
Yeah.
I got to watch this again. Not that I wouldn't want to watch it again, but I'm going to watch it now specifically for that. That's great.
Right.
Lots of matte paintings because it's the 80s, of course, to kind of establish that. I mean, I'm sure that like the arcs, that scene at the end is that's so beautiful to not be a matte painting. Real tarantulas and snakes, because again, not CGI. Love all that. I love that they've taken out you could see the reflection of the cobra for the longest time, and now
I still like that. I think it's great, And
it's
Harrison,
really there, though.
Yeah, it is. And you hear Harrison talk about that in interviews. That look on his face was authentic because
of course it is.
That thing popped up, Who wouldn't be, But I love too that Spielberg said, nope, got to have more snakes. They had to round up more snakes. They didn't have enough. He said it looked fake. It was just didn't look good enough. So I think they emptied all the shops in London and everywhere around that had snakes to bring them there.
Amazing. I've always loved the map room. I don't know how that would necessarily work, but I just love it. Visually, I just think that's fantastic. But my biggest thing with that is the staff is supposed to be 6 feet tall, right? 5 feet tall. No, 6 feet, and then take off a foot. So how is it taller than Indy? How short is Indy? That never quite jived. Well, since I've been old enough to pay attention.
Yeah.
It's maybe he's standing off to the side. No, it's all right. It looks more imposing that way, I guess. Yeah, tiny little nitpicks.
But wait, was it, did he say, I can't remember. Was it in feet or was it in another measurement?
Well, he said it's about 72 inches, and then take away 12. Then take away 12.
Okay.
This time I paid special attention to to make sure that I knew exactly where C-3PO and R2-D2 are.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're on that post next to the Ark. They're on Indy's right as they're lifting the stone. So if you're looking at Indiana Jones as they're lifting it up, it's on over his right shoulder. So for our listeners, just in case you didn't know that was there, it's once you see it, you can't unsee it.
I actually saw today, Craig, someone's made an action figure of it's a Raiders action figure with 3PO inside with the close-up. The image on the card is the close-up of 3PO engraved on the carved on the wall. Right. But that's it's done just like the Kenner's Kenner vintage card, but it was 3PO inside.
That's fantastic. Just some other things. Yeah, I wrote down about the staff. I love the fact that Tote's coat hanger was originally something that was supposed to be in 1941, and that didn't work, and that gag didn't work, and so they reused that.
Yeah.
And then Ralph McQuarrie worked on the Ark decorations. So
the only piece of artwork that he did was the illustration in the Bible. Of the Ark of the Covenant. So you know what you see in the Bible at the beginning. That's Ralph's really major contribution.
So looking down at characters, we've covered just about everybody else. I should mention Ronald Lacey as Tote, who that's a figure that I had, and so that character was very important to me. But I didn't know his name for the longest time. He's not in it a ton, but he's great. He's very effective.
Oh, he really is. He's got that Peter Lorre-esque, nature about him. He's like, and that, especially his laugh is so creepy.
Oh yeah. We didn't mention Denholm Elliott as Marcus Brody. He's fantastic in this as well.
He is, and that's one thing about Brody. To me, his character changes a great deal between or from this film to the next, because when I see Brody in this one, he seems very academic, very straight-laced, but then you see him in Last Crusade and he's kind of the bumbling fool, almost, which at one time I'm reading somebody's take on that, somebody's explanation, but I can't recall what it is, but it's kind of a glaring difference between two portrayals of Brody, but I love Brody.
Some other things, I always love the fact that William Hootkins is in this. He plays Major Eaton. Of course, he's Porkins from the original Star Wars movie. He's Eckhart in Batman '89. One thing that had bugged me for years, and I finally figured out, is that George Harris, who plays Katanga, he's also more recently played Kingsley Shacklebolt in the Harry Potter movies. And that's why when I saw Kingsley Shacklebolt, I was like, I know that guy from somewhere, but couldn't place it.
Thank you. That answers that for me too. Yep. Never knew that. Yep. That's crazy.
Oh, he's so good.
Yeah.
Pat Roach as, the big giant guy at the beginning, and as the mechanic guy. So.
Right. That was really cool. He got to play two bad guys in the same film. Yeah.
And then shows up in the next one.
Exactly. Right. He's the guard, right?
Yeah. Let's see. We've talked a little bit about, I'm looking at Hero's Journey, and he's pretty much fully formed, but the fact that he's fallible and gets hurt is amazing and kind of a new concept for this type of character. I think that's why he's incredibly relatable. I've had that conversation multiple times with people. That's why that character's so good.
To me, he's everyman. He really is kind of an everyman, because he gets the crap kicked out of him. Yes. And keeps on going. It's like he is fallible. To me, that's also kind of like why I like Din Djarin, the Mandalorian. He's I see that's a conversation for another time, but a lot of parallels between the two.
Sure, he's out of his depth sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So as looks like we're just about ready to wrap up. Final thoughts, Thomas, on Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Justin said something earlier, and I think he said it kind of half jokingly. I couldn't tell, about that influencing him becoming a history teacher. Well, there's two movies that I think probably had a lot to do with me going into that field, because that's what I am by trade, as a history teacher. And that was actually Star Wars. I loved the old feel to it. My dad actually probably had a lot to do with it, because he raised me on Errol Flynn, swashbucklers, and John Wayne. She wore a yellow ribbon, so the Western movies and things like that. And so from a young age, I had an interest in historical period films, if you will, or stories. But then when Raiders came along, by that time I'd already had a keen interest in World War II as well, and World War I. And it kind of checked all the boxes for me. And the piece of archaeology added to that. So, gosh, I guess my freshman year in college, my senior year in high school, I was thinking about becoming an underwater archaeologist. This was something I wanted to. I'd kind of morphed from marine biology into underwater archaeology, but I couldn't get away from history. And I think honestly, that character of Indiana Jones did have an influence in me, especially having an interest in things of the past and studying ancient relics and things like that. So, I look at this movie not only as a great film, it's almost like you said, a flawless picture, but the story itself has influenced so many people. I know countless historians, archaeologists that I've spoken with over the years, who say that, hey, it's a bad example of archaeology, but yeah, I went into archaeology because of Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't have had that without Raiders, So it's just a fun film. It's a great popcorn flick. It's the way movies used to be made in the summers, that left you just feeling great. And I was excited to be able to enjoy his last film as much as I did, as much as I did, to see this character, kind of close out a story. And there were so many great callbacks to Raiders in that one. But yeah, I think it's just a flawless piece of filmmaking. That's why it was gone down as one of the great classics of all time. But personally,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
it's like Justin said earlier. It's over 40 years old now, and it could be made yesterday. It's such a good film. I really can't add on too much to what you just said because it was beautiful.
People talk about a reboot or anything like that. No, you don't reboot this, and I'm even torn. I'd love to see more Indiana Jones stories. I think animation is the way to go. I think comics or novels or things like that, especially an animated series. But Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones, and I just can't see anyone else playing him.
Oh, agreed. So before we get out of here, Thomas, I want to give you an opportunity to let us know what's going on with you with Imagineering Education. You mentioned something a little bit off mic before. So tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so I have a consulting business called Imagineering Education, where we work with helping particularly teachers and create immersive experiences and spaces for students to help with student engagement and learning. And the whole idea came from a TEDx talk I did a number of years ago called Imagineering Education, and it was built around the premise of what if we design schools like Disney designs theme parks? So what would it look like if we took those same kind of design principles and applied them to our classrooms? And when I started playing with that idea, I realized that the Imagineers were giving language to things I intuitively knew as a teacher worked. And so at that point in time, as an administrator who was working on helping to design a middle school, we began to make intentional use of color and space design and things like that to create these spaces that were designed to increase student engagement. And I've seen it work time and time again over the years. So I'm excited. I've been working on a course for about a year that kind of distills all this into an e-course that's going to be available starting January 15th. And just went on sale last Friday. So it's it's real. It's happening. It's something I've been working on, like I said, for quite a while. It's about 4.5 hours of content that you'll get. And if anyone wants to know more about that course, they can find me at imagineeringedu.com.
Awesome. And we'll have some other links for the website and for you on X as well, so we can reach out if they have other questions.
Yeah, that would be great. And you can also we're still working away at promoting teaching with Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and this year has been mainly with Indy. And there's some projects that my partner Wes Dodgens. Wes and I have been doing Indy in the classroom and Star Wars in the classroom together for years. We taught together at a high school for many years. And he's been my partner in crime with all these fun adventures. But we've still got some irons in the fire and some things we hope to be able to talk about in the coming year. So follow us at Indy in the classroom and Star Wars in the classroom, and you'll find out more.
Sounds great. So as we close, we just want to say thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on X and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend and support us by writing a review on your favorite podcast catcher. And one last thing, our next episode will be a review of Mission Impossible with special guest David Jesse. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Mission Impossible, and we'll share it on the next episode.